The next speaker is Dr. Jon Hackett, who's Programme Director for Film and Communications. You can see the title of the talk there, When Media Goes Mobile. Jon has done a lot of research into popular music and film theory, very apt, given the venue that we have here today. I'm sure you will now all enjoy his talk, and I'll hand over to Jon.
Hello, everyone. My talk is When Media Goes Mobile. And because I represent two sets of programs at St Mary's, film and communications, I've tried to combine the two. So at the end of the talk, I'll be talking about what happens when film ends up on mobile phones. And I'm going to be talking very quickly because I've only got 8 minutes. So first of all, hat tip to Sam Summers from the University of Sunderland. I'm tempted to say good PowerPoints borrow, great PowerPoints steal. So I got the premise for this presentation from a really good presentation I saw at an academic conference earlier this year. In the presentation I'm going to be looking at some of the ways in which mobile has changed our idea of how media works, and there's a hell of a lot to say on that, so I'm just going to be cherry-picking particular aspects. When the internet and new media first came about, people often talked in terms of, Al Gore called it the information superhighway, and Manuel Castells called it the network society. So people were thinking very much about kind of cognitive and informational aspects, but really, when mobile phones came about, we realised it might be much more about things like affect and feeling and emotion. So certain things we didn't initially think were going to be important about new media started to be more important emotional responses and more personal ways of interacting with media. So one thing that media has taught us is that it would become something which was much more personal, social, and to do with feelings and emotions. Now, the next part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about some of the interesting things that people have noticed about mobile phones as devices. Often the narrative of new media is now everything has changed. The internet has come about, new media is with us, and nothing will ever be the same again. And to an extent that's true, but also people have, from the perspective of what's known as media archaeology, people have made links between very old, sometimes obsolete forms of media and much more recent forms. So there's a book by Tom Standage on the Telegraph called The Victorian Internet. And his point basically is a lot of the bold claims that were made about technologies like the internet actually are there in embryo, in obsolete and much more archaic forms of technology. Also, many people have observed the similarities between websites and the format of newspapers, mastheads, banners, sidebars, and so on and so forth. So it's not like new media completely reinvents the wheel. That's the point I'm trying to make. There are continuities as well as differences when new media comes about. Some people have linked mobile phones themselves to previous gizmos and gadgets. So people used to think of the internet and new media as something that we'd look at only on PCs or Macs. Well, now they're on handheld devices. And people have made links with pre-cinematic forms of media. You'll be aware of flip books. People still make them. You can make moving pictures by flicking through pages rapidly and looking at the corner. There are also things like thaumatropes, where you have a picture of a cage and a bird on opposing sides of a disc, and you spin it, and it creates the optical illusion of the bird being in the cage. There are things like zoetropes and phenakistoscopes, which are Victorian optical toys where you spin the wheel and look through the slits and see the moving horses, etc., etc. So people have become interested in what happens when people look at let's say moving image on a mobile phone. It seems to be reinstating or bringing back a tactile relationship with the device to create moving pictures. Do you see? It might seem a bit fanciful because obviously a mobile phone is a type of digital media which has much more functionality than a flip book. But there is nonetheless some kind of relationship between making things move with your fingers and so on. The device, the moving image, and the individual media consumption is the same. And this is a royalty-free image the library will be pleased to hear. The flipbook was sometimes also called the kineograph. So now I'm going to try and do something. Hope this works like a mobile phone. Yeah, great. That's relief. Okay, so this is a picture by the French Romantic painter Théodore Géricault. Okay, so he was painting in the early part of the 19th century, and this is a painting of the Epsom Derby. And at the time, people thought, well, wow, what an incredible picture. We're never going to have a more vivid, immersive, convincing representation of what it's like to be at the races. This is what it's like. No one's going to beat that. You'll notice that the horses are off the ground and their hooves, well, their forelegs are outstretched forwards, their hind legs are outstretched backwards. Now, when we invented photography, a guy called Muybridge, who comes from Kingston, I take our first year students to Kingston Museum to see the permanent exhibition of his gadgets. When Muybridge invented a technique for taking lots of photographs split seconds apart and then reconstructing animal motion through them, we ended up with something like this. This is based on Muybridge's photographs, which are being animated in a GIF, which again is a type of moving image, created for these new digital devices. Originally, when these photographs were produced, when Victorian era photographs taken split second apart were produced, probably the best way to animate them would be a flip book. So you could make a book full of photographs and so on, and then flip that through. It took the Lumiere brothers and projection to be able to allow us to do that through, I suppose, film. But, this is, again, continuities between handheld devices, moving image, and media consumption. So images could be animated frame by frame with these devices, and there are parallels with, let's say, looking at a GIF on your mobile phone, at least to some extent. Of course, I have to kind of speed up now, I guess. More recently, we are now in a position where we can watch entire films on mobile phones. We can, access Netflix. So unlike, let's say, in 1G and 2G phones, we can watch media with a lot greater extent. So people have started to make film and television now with that in mind. This is the beginning of a film by some of our talented third-year students, Stockholm Syndrome. And this is the kind of film that works really well on a mobile device. You can see there a character who is framed within a window frame, within a phone frame, if you like. So these devices also change the viewing situation. Historically, when people watch cinema, they were in a darkened auditorium with no distractions. The Dream Factory, Hollywood was called. People likened the viewing situation to being in a dream. You're immobilized in a dark space, and you're immersed in the fantasy. Now, when you look at moving image on a device, you've got the whole visual field around you to distract you, even more so than television. It's a very different viewing experience, and these are the kind of questions that we're becoming interested in now in relation to people watching moving image on devices. Just the final point, really, is that some films are now being shot on mobile phones. There's a really good film by Tangerine, by Sean Baker, which is shot on iPhone 5s. And horror films now are having to add a narrative premise for why characters can't just phone 911. I've mentioned a couple of them there. And I'm out of time. Thanks for your time.